Good day to you. I'm making this quick video in the hope that it might just help somebody who's trying to get power of attorney over bank accounts that belong to other people in another country. In this particular case, I was trying to help some people living in Zimbabwe who have money in England in two bank accounts held with Halifax. And I took on the task of trying to get their money freed up from these two accounts so that I could get the money to them in Zimbabwe. It's a long, complicated story. They opened up these two savings accounts at Halifax so that their British pensions could be paid into these accounts and to save up a nest egg for themselves. They did this. One account was open for 5 years, the other one open for about 6 or 7 years. What nobody told them from Halifax is that after 3 years, the accounts automatically become dormant. And at that point in time, it's virtually like closing the door on that place in America where you all run into in a nuclear war. It's virtually impossible to get the money out of there. They tried, my friends in Zimbabwe, they tried for over a year. In fact, I think it was about 18 months to get their own money released from savings accounts. And their financial needs were great. They were becoming desperate for this money, which was £15,000. And they just couldn't find any way of getting the money freed. So I volunteered as a lifelong friend of theirs, and I became involved in the terrible struggle that they had been facing for the last 18 months. It was unbelievable. So I contacted the Power of Attorney office at Halifax. They told me what to do because previous powers of attorney forms coming from Africa or Zimbabwe were unacceptable to Halifax. But before they told us that what had been sent was no good, they told us what to do. And so I got hold of my friends in Zimbabwe through Zoom, told them what they had to do to get power of attorney forms written up. To cut a long story short, they spent over $700 in DHL fees, going backwards and forwards. Every time forms came from Africa, Halifax seemed to have moved the goalposts. They sent over forms signed by a Commission of Oaths. They were rejected because they didn't tell us a Commission of Oaths couldn't sign them. It just had to be signed by a friend. So we drew up another draft. I mean, this was about 8 different drafts into trying to get the right power of attorney. They were all rejected. I became absolutely desperate on their behalf, but thank the Lord, the couple that I was trying to help had a relative in England who is a barrister, and she phoned the power of attorney department at Halifax, and they explained to her what the power of attorney document required in terms of wording and acts under the English law that were required. None of this was told to us before. It was almost like it came out in dribs and drabs over a period of 6 to 9 months. I battled backwards and forwards. These poor people. One of them, my friend, is in a wheelchair. His wife is not far behind. They're elderly, late 70s, early 80s, couldn't get in to see authorities easily where they're living, going through a terrible time, about to be kicked out of the home that they're living in because they couldn't pay the rent. It was desperate. I got so angry with Halifax. Letters I wrote to the head office were never ever answered, and every time I phoned the Power of Attorney office, I had a different story. To cut a long story short, the barrister eventually got the wording from Halifax. She got the act that had to be, embedded in the power of attorney to show it's under English law. Why they couldn't give us all this stuff to begin with. To cut a long story short, we eventually got the correct power of attorneys, which they accepted. After many trips, I live in Salisbury in England, and I had to go to Halifax and Southampton. They sent me to the wrong branch. I should have been in Andover. I went back to Southampton a second time. I went to Andover. I went to Salisbury twice. And every time I presented documents, they were wrong or whatever. But finally, by the grace of God, they accepted the power of attorney. Then when I was sitting in their office, I think it was in Southampton, they said, "Oh, but no, where's the letter from the solicitor saying that these documents are correct and that he or she's been in contact with a couple in Zimbabwe?" So that was step 349. Eventually, we got a letter from her, which was submitted in one of my many visits to one of the branches at Halifax. And after a long story, they accepted that letter. And then I got a final registration, had a personal interview, and a week later I got 2 encrypted emails that had a special passcode in it. And a power of attorney was granted to me for both of these savings accounts. I then wanted to draw money out, but I couldn't. They said, "Come back in a week's time and you can draw the lot out if you want to, or have it transferred," which is exactly what I did in the end. But the point I'm trying to make here, which I hope helps you, is that at the end of the day, it's best to go straight to a solicitor. They might cost you £200 or £300 or £400, but let them do the fighting. Let them do the interviewing with your friends or relatives overseas. Let them do it. If you can't afford that, then I suggest you phone the power of attorney office and ask them at whatever bank it is, in this case it's Halifax, and ask them to dictate a general power of attorney form that you can fill in. And I don't know why they haven't done this. I don't know why they haven't got a lawyer from within Halifax, they must employ them, who could write up templates for standard, ordinary power of attorney. I'm not talking about a life power of attorney, which takes up to a year to register with the authorities in England. An ordinary power of attorney should be a simple form copied or covered by a letter from a solicitor to say that it falls under English law. So why can't the lawyers at Halifax do that? I don't know, and I will be writing to the Bank of Scotland asking them why they can't do this. The Bank of Scotland owns Halifax. To cut a long story short, if you go through a solicitor, they'll be able to draw up the correct power of attorney. Halifax doesn't seem to have a template, or they must have faced this problem 1,000 times. It's been a nightmare, but I want to encourage any of you listening to this to just keep persisting. You'll eventually get your money. But I think to save yourself the nightmare, go to a solicitor who's prepared to help you. And trying to find a solicitor was a nightmare. Even that was difficult because they're all so busy and they're into big cases and they don't want to help you. But get them to interview people by Zoom. Get them to show the people overseas, to show the documents to the camera. Get them to figure out what the power of attorney form should be like. And that will save you years of frustration. Don't try and make up your own powers of attorney. You will just be shoved from pillar to post. I will put my email address at the bottom of this video clip, and if any of you want to know what the final power of attorney form looked like, I'll be willing to send it on to you privately. It's a bit of a vague message, this, but I hope it helps you. I hope it solves at least part of a query or a frustration that you're going through trying to get power of attorney over someone else's account. And that's all I can say, really. So after 18 months, 6 to 9 months of my own input, finally on Friday I got custody of the money and was able to send it to them so that they weren't evicted from their property. But what a mission. And I went out and celebrated with Eggs Benedict and a cup of coffee. Dear God, the bureaucracy in this world.